Hello, folks. Welcome. We'll just wait a moment as folks filter in. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Susanna Hermans, co-owner of Oblong Books. We have two bookstores in the Hudson Valley in New York State. And tonight we are so excited to continue our celebration of Pride Month by featuring Rae McDaneil's amazing book, Gender Magic. Rae is here in conversation with Ellis Light. Rae is a non-binary therapist, certified sex therapist, coach, and transgender diversity and inclusion educator. They're the founder and CEO of Practical Audacity, a gender and sex therapy practice in Chicago, and an international speaker on gender freedom. As an expert in sexuality and gender exploration, they've been featured in such places as the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Time, Women's Health, and more. Rae holds degrees from DePaul University, University of Michigan, and is certified by AASECT. They live in Chicago. We are also joined by Ellis Light, who is an organizer with the Trans Closet of the Hudson Valley, right in our neck of the woods, which is a grassroots organization dedicated to providing clothes, gender-affirming supplies, and other resources to the Hudson Valley's trans community without question or cost. They are also an editor, artist, and recovering academic. They live in Saugerties, New York. I'm going to let you two go at it, and I will, in the meantime, be dropping in the chat some links to buy Rae's amazing book, and as well as a link to the Trans Closet, so you can find out all about the wonderful work they're doing. If you have questions for our guests, you can drop them in the chat or use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Thank you so much, Rae and Ellis.
Thank you so much for having us. Excited to be here. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Welcome, everyone. Rae, it's so lovely to have you in our neck of the woods / virtually.
I am thrilled to be here and excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I thought your book was like such an interesting read, and I wanted to start out by just talking to you like about the very first thing you see on the cover, which is that title. How did you come up with that, with the title of Gender Magic? Like, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
what do we like gain from thinking about gender as magical?
I love this question. So the very practical answer for this is that a lot of titles were thrown around, a lot of different permutations of titles, and just kind of a word salad situation. And we ended up on Gender Magic. But the deeper meaning behind it is that I talk about in Gender Magic that I started signing my correspondence and text messages and things like that a while ago with P.S. I think you're magic. And to me, that means, hey, you, whoever I'm talking to, I think that you are lit up, that there's something about you that feels magical to me. And I ended up on the title of Gender Magic because that is really what I wanted to do with this book. Is I wanted to give people information and tools that would truly help them feel lit up and alive and more fully who they are. And to me, that is always going to be magical when I see somebody who is walking around in the world like that, whether or not they identify as trans.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I liked about your book the most was that you provide so much like actual practical information and advice, while at the same time speaking really directly to the reader, and like really just an encouraging voice. I felt like your voice as a therapist came out, because you're a therapist as
Thank
well,
you.
right?
I am, yes.
Yeah. Did you find that your work as a therapist, I mean, obviously it influenced this book, but like, how did that sort of come into the writing of this book? Because I would imagine like being in a one-on-one therapy session, is quite different than writing to a gigantic audience of, you don't know how many, but you hope
Yeah.
many, right?
Yeah, it is and it isn't. A lot of writing advice will tell you to write to one person. And I feel like for a lot of the book, I was really trying to do that. I was trying to write gender magic in a way that it would feel like I was sitting down and having coffee with a good friend that I cared about and wanted to help out, wanted to support, wanted to walk beside on their journey. So in that way, I definitely had in mind, maybe not one particular person, but imagining in my head that I was talking to someone like one of my clients. And I will also say that so much of the content in the book and the way I talk about gender and the way I talk about gender transition comes from my clients. It comes from years and years of talking to many different people about their gender journeys and seeing the struggles that they went through and seeing the through lines and seeing the places where they got stuck. And so that was such an important piece of the content that ended up in Gender Magic, was pretty much a direct through line from my work with therapy.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of one of the questions I wanted to ask you was like, who did you write this book for? Like, who is your audience? And you said it was, you were imagining like writing it to someone like many of your clients, but um, who else will benefit from reading this book? Like, who is this book written for?
I think one of the challenges of this book, and something that I tried to do very intentionally, is I did want to speak directly to folks who are exploring gender, who are trans, who are non binary. And I also wanted to write it in a way that an ally could pick it up, somebody who has a trans person as a loved one, somebody who just wants to learn how to be a better ally generally, or learn about the topic of gender freedom in a new way. So I wanted to provide this kind of new paradigm for how we think about gender, how we talk about it, and maybe some language that anybody could use, whether they are personally going through that journey or whether they're wanting to support other people who are as well. So it was an interesting balance to strike, of wanting to talk directly to the trans and non-binary folks in the audience, but also to talk to their parents, their bosses, their siblings, their partners, their friends. And I think it turned out pretty well. So I'm hoping that everybody can pick it up and take something away from it, not only in their allyship, if they aren't trans, but also learn something about themselves in the process, because gender is something that impacts all of us, no matter what our gender identity.
Yeah, and I thought that like the way that you frame it in the first part of the book, you go through like some of the common terminology that we use to talk about gender, some of the things that like people who are really new to talking about gender might not necessarily be super
Yeah,
familiar with. And I thought that was really helpful for people who are like picking up this book and like, what's all this about? Um,
exactly.
Yeah. And also that like everyone has a complex experience of gender, right? Like it's not limited to trans and non-binary folks.
No, it's certainly not. And one of the studies that I share in the book, which is one of my favorites because I also think it's really funny, is they put a bunch of babies into what I consider a like dog agility course, essentially. And they had the parents there. I think they were mostly mothers in this study, and they asked the mothers to rate their confidence in how quickly they thought that their child would go over one of the obstacles, which was one of those like kind of ladder things where the dogs go up and then they go down. So how quickly their child would go over the ladder situation, and how much confidence their child would have in doing that task. And they found that the parents, pretty much across the board, underestimated the ability and the confidence level of their children who were assigned female at birth, even though there was no difference in ability and confidence in the children. what that tells us, and that's just one example of gender plays such an important role in how we think we're supposed to show up in the world, the expectations that others have of us, our values, what jobs we end up taking, what we study in school, our emotional development, and certainly how we present ourselves in the world. Those are things that impact everyone. And that's why gender freedom, which is the main message of the book, is one for everybody.
Absolutely. And like I like the idea of freedom because that encapsulates, you talk a lot about play, pleasure, and possibility as like
Mhm.
three things that you're trying to like get people to experience with gender. Can you talk a little about what you mean by those three terms?
Yes. So play, pleasure, and possibility are terms that came up with me as I was trying to take all the stuff in my head and the ways that I've been working with clients and research in psychology and educational theory and design and put it into a model that makes sense. And what I ended up with was a model with these three pillars of play, pleasure, and possibility. And what play means and why that is so important is that if you think of kids playing on a playground, they generally aren't stuck in their head. They're not too worried about judging others or having others judge them. There's a freedom, there's a lightheartedness to that. There's also not the ability to fail. You can't fail at playing. And I wanted to bring that attitude into gender transition. How can we approach gender exploration and transition with a sense of play, with curiosity and experimentation, and maybe even inviting others who are like minded in on that journey with us? Because when we do that, it literally puts you in a different part of your brain. It puts you in this front kind of prefrontal cortex, which allows you to think better. It allows you to make decisions easier and with more confidence. So I wanted to try to orient folks to what are we moving towards versus what are we moving away from. So that's the play place. The pleasure part, I'm a sex therapist and I talk about sex and relationships a lot. And I actually became a sex therapist after I had already developed a specialization in working with trans folks, because inevitably, in pretty much all of my sessions, sex and relationships would come up because those things are so impactful in our connection to ourselves and our own body and how we experience pleasure and connection in here, and also how we connect to other people and what types of intimacy we think are available, and the barriers to those, to pleasure and connection, are some of the most painful. And I was seeing that as well for my clients. So I wanted to offer people a way forward through those barriers, to be able to truly experience pleasure in their own bodies, only with themselves if that's what they want, but also with other people if that is something that they're interested in. And possibility is all about what's next. I found that so many of the books and the things that I was reading about a trans experience kind of stopped at, and now you're trans. Okay. But what now? How do we want to live our lives? And an even more important question than that, how can we imagine and reimagine what is possible for ourselves? Because what I found in my clients and what I found personally as a non-binary person is that when I felt free, when I felt alive, when I felt the most like myself, I showed up to life in a very different way. I showed up to boundaries and relationships and how I was willing to be treated and how I wanted to spend my time in a different way. And I wanted to help any readers of the book to start to imagine, what could this look like if we move away from just surviving into thriving? And what does thriving as a transgender or non-binary person truly mean?
Gosh, yeah, all of that And there's so much there, but like I feel like it's all kind of wrapped up in this idea of like freedom and joy,
Yes.
um, and really being exploratory. Like when kids play outside, right? That was the first example that you led with. Like
Yeah.
there isn't a plan. It's not, I mean, sometimes it's like sports or sports games or whatever. I don't know
Sure.
anything about that.
Sports
Um,
ball?
I don't know her. Um, but like if you think about just being a kid, going outside and not having any type of plan and just like picking up a stick and doing something with it, with, or whatever it might be. Um, and I think that analogy can translate really well to thinking about transition, right? Because
Yes.
there's this idea that transition is a narrative and there are steps and check marks.
Hmm.
And if you don't do all of them, that you're not trans enough. Um, and instead, maybe it's you're just a kid in the great outdoors of your own gender.
Which is such a beautiful way of thinking about it. Because if you have steps, right, you can fail a step. And like you're saying, sometimes people don't resonate with certain parts of transition. Maybe they don't want to socially or legally or medically transition, or have certain goals for medical transition and aren't interested in others. And none of those things make somebody less trans. And when we come at that from this attitude of, we're all just playing on this playground of gender and figuring out what feels good and occasionally maybe bumping into each other and laughing, that is a much, much different vibe to come at it with, which is also why I love what your organization does. So I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit more about that, because one thing that struck me as I was looking at it is the focus on joy and that focus on experimentation and what does it mean to show up in the world as you, and you facilitate that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, but even before you mentioned the trans closet, I was thinking about like um how in our closet space we have a physical location at the Dutchess County Pride Center
Mhm.
in Hopewell Junction, New York. And we do monthly drop-in hours there so people can just come and hang out or try on clothes, take clothes home, get measured for a binder or a bra, um, or like help fold clothes and help volunteer. It's really kind of open to whatever folks want to do. Um, but I've also found that like even just me being there as a trans non-binary person, like it feels kind of like a sandbox. There's all of these
Yeah,
clothes and none of them are sorted like according to the binary gender system you find in like
I
a
love that.
Target. Um, so it's kind of just whatever clothes are there, whatever clothes you're interested in, you can try on and kind of explore and play with. Um,
I love that.
yeah, and like, and also when we're doing pride events and sort of public stuff like that, there's no gatekeeping. You don't have to be this trans to come to our booth and try something on. Um, so that gives everyone kind of the opportunity to explore and play and think about like, well, I've always thought of myself this way, but what if I put on this item of clothing?
Yeah.
Or what, if you find something that you're just like really drawn to. Um, and I think, that's the focus is really on like fashion and clothing, but it's also much larger about just self-expression.
Absolutely. I mean, fashion and clothing goes so far beyond just what you're putting on your body. It is an expression of who you are, and that's important. And to have a space where somebody can experiment with that with no gatekeeping and to their heart's content is it's really special, I think.
Yeah, and I think that like so much emphasis too you know, is on how to mitigate dysphoria. And we definitely
Hmm.
do that, right?
Sure.
Like um finding clothes that as people transition into a new wardrobe, um, getting rid of their old clothes, because we also take donations from people who want to get rid of their old clothes. And then finding a whole new wardrobe is incredibly affirming. But also it's about finding euphoria, right? Figuring out like where your joy is and um, what kinds of positive connections you can have to clothing, not just, oh my God, my body feels so wrong. How do I live in this body? Um,
Exactly.
yeah, so I actually wanted to ask you, since you're, a therapist and all of that, like, I know that the history of transition has kind of centered around dysphoria a bit. So why do you think like reframing that towards euphoria is so important, either on like kind of a personal level, like through individuals, or just larger like political level?
Yeah. So, I mean, we all probably know about the DSM, which is where all the mental health diagnoses are. That's where gender dysphoria lives. Um, the narrative that we've gotten about gender transition and gender exploration really does, especially when it comes to medical and mental health providers, focus on dysphoria, this deficit model of I feel terrible in my own body. We can name the trope, which is sometimes true, and I don't want to minimize this, but it has become a little bit of a trope of like, I was born in the wrong body, or I hate myself. And that becomes where you center a definition of what it means to be trans or what it means to be non-binary. And if we step back from that, we can maybe see why that's a problem, because we've created a system where you have to hate yourself in order to be yourself. And that makes no sense to me. I'm much more interested in looking not so much at what people are leaving behind, but where they want to go. What are you going for? What would make you feel more like yourself, more lit up, more authentic, more audacious? And how can we orient gender transition and gender exploration in that direction instead of only focusing on dysphoria? Now, dysphoria is real, and I am absolutely not trying to minimize that. It's very painful for a lot of people. Um, and I get that. I really and truly do. And we can hold that. And we're not trying to just shove it under the rug. We can hold that while also saying we need to put equal or even more weight on who are you trying to become? Who do you want to be in the world? What do you want your life to look like? Because that is a much stronger motivator. And, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I talk about brains a bit. But going back to this front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, we know that when you are focused on what you are moving towards, you're activating this part of your brain. It makes decisions easier. Like I said, it makes the process feel better versus when you are focused on dysphoria and what you are leaving behind, you're more in that survival brain. You're more likely to get flooded. You're more likely to feel frozen, and you're more likely to feel hopeless and helpless. And those feelings are real and they're painful. And I truly believe that there is a better way that we can help people move through those difficult feelings so that they can focus on, okay, now where are we going?
Absolutely. And I don't think like on a personal level, I don't think I even realized how dysphoric I was until I thought about euphoria, until I thought about
Yeah.
where I wanted to actually go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was sort of like, wait a second, I have other options. I
Yeah.
could I could actually escape from like the sort of numbness that I have felt for my entire life. You mean everyone doesn't just feel this like blah all of the time? Um, and so imagining a different kind of possibility was kind of what led me to that.
Absolutely. And to me, it is let me back up and say that sentence again. To me, when you are tapping into that sense of possibility, what you're also tapping into when you talk about euphoria is, I call it that like gut yes, that just, oh, yes, this thing. Oh my God, I didn't know I could experience that. When you are able to intentionally tap into that and notice when it's happening, that becomes a compass for you for other things, both related to gender and not related to gender. You start to make decisions from that place instead of just the, oh no, that feels bad, which is also good data. And you can make decisions from that place. But what if we also included the, yes, that feels good. I want more of that in my life.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the most helpful explanations of orientation that I ever heard was that, and I think this relates to gender too, but also sexual orientation, was that orientation is like a compass or a magnet inside you that is pulling you towards something. Or if it's a magnet, maybe pushing you away from something,
Yeah.
right? But that was so helpful to me because it wasn't about anything except just what is the inside of you talking about? What is it that you are drawn towards?
I love that metaphor. That's great.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit nautical, which I enjoy.
Always a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, and so like what you write about is mostly about that inner work that you're doing, right? Like the
hmm
um which like it's play, but it's also work, right?
It
Because
is.
occasionally I would notice that you would slip into like you're talking about play and then you're talking about the hard work. So what do you think the connection is? And I think there is a connection between like the work that we do on ourselves and the sense of play that we can find.
Yeah, I think there is too. It's interesting. So when I'm talking about play and then move into the like, but we're gonna like dig into the hard stuff now.
Yeah.
There are still these attitudes of play that even if you aren't saying, hey, this is the most fun thing I've ever done, you can still bring in attitudes like curiosity. You can bring in an attitude of experimenting and tiny
Mhm.
steps. I talk about tiny steps a lot in gender magic. And you can take steps again toward what you want, what you are desiring, what you're moving towards, that don't feel like you have failure just kind of hovering over your head. Because again, there's no failure in play. And I use the metaphor of, when you're cooking spaghetti and you pick the spaghetti up and you throw it at the wall and you see if it sticks, and if it doesn't, it's fine, no big deal. You have not failed at the spaghetti. You just keep cooking it, and then finally it sticks, and you're like, okay, cool, it's ready. When we approach some of the harder things of transition or fears that we may have about, how do I want to present in the world? What will it be like if I talk to a loved one or talk to a coworker about my identity? Those things can feel so big and so heavy. And what I noticed in my work was that a lot of my clients were avoiding them because they felt so big and so heavy. And so by bringing in some of these attitudes of play, again, even if it isn't always a walk in the park, we were able to do things like design little experiments to test out, okay, well, if you are afraid to wear a dress to brunch, let's think about putting that dress on in your apartment and walking down to the elevator and then coming right back up. Or the next experiment might be, let's put on the dress and walk down and walk, right outside of your building and then come back in. Or do that and go around the block. Ask a friend to go on a walk with you and work your way up to, okay, I'm going to brunch and a dress. But by the time you get there, you've played with it so much and you've experimented with it so much that you've developed a lot of emotional regulation skills and also figured out more of that compass, right? Do I feel good in this? Do I not? Am I just nervous about what people think, or is this really not my style and something I want to wear? So you make a lot of discoveries along the way. And I found that that is the most helpful frame for my clients to really be able to move towards what they want without it feeling quite as heavy.
And I love how that's also not a point A to point B thing, right? It's
Mm-mm.
not a, I want to wear a dress, I practice these steps, and then I get to wear a dress to brunch. It's like, so I wore the dress, I got to the point where I got to the Starbucks, but I realized that when I have to walk too far in this dress, I really don't like how it rubs up against my shoulder. Um,
Exactly.
or I actually think I might look cuter in like a skirt and top, like, or whatever it might
Mm-hmm.
be. There's so much room to like diverge from the single path.
Exactly. There is no single path. And when we think about gender exploration and transition as just a part of self-growth, it nixes that entire idea of a single path. And it nixes that entire idea of we need to arrive somewhere because we're always growing and changing into more of who we are. And I found that that brings a lot more ease and a lot less pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that actually reminded me of the subtitle of your book, which is talking about stepping into your most authentic self.
Mhm.
Um, and then throughout the course of the book, you kind of like reframe the concept of authenticity. Like, what do you think that means, stepping into your most authentic self? And um, what do you have to say about like authenticity? What is it to be authentic?
Yeah, it's such a juicy question because I think most of the time when people think authentic, they think, and in regards to gender identity or gender exploration or transition, it's like, I'm out, I'm proud everywhere. Facebook, look at me, like everybody, here I am. And sometimes that's it. And that's a beautiful thing when it is. And sometimes life doesn't look like that. There are sometimes people or environments where it's not safe to be really, truly your most authentic self in that environment. And I'll give an example. I am not out officially to my parents. And the reason that is I'm out as queer to them, but they did not take that well. And if you read Gender Magic, you'll get a little bit more of that background. But it was a very conscious decision on my part to not do this big kind of coming out thing as a non binary person with them because they were never going to be able to meet me there. And that is a choice I'm making for now. That might change, and I'm allowing that to change in my life if it does. But for now, what authenticity means to me is that I am myself everywhere. I just didn't need to make this big coming out kind of proclamation to them because it was not emotionally safe for me to do so. I talk about this idea of strategic gender expression, which is a term I got from a researcher, Lou Lindley, thinking about how strategically presenting our gender different ways in different environments, depending on what we need to be physically safe, to be emotionally safe, and to be financially safe, which is a big one, right? If you're going to lose your college funding, if you're going to lose your job or not get hired, that's a very real consideration. And how strategically making those decisions can actually be a form of self care and can be a form of authenticity because the most authentic thing that you can do is to keep yourself safe.
Yeah. And it also, like, I mean, queer and trans people, we've always been strategic, right? We've always survived, we've always been around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we've also always managed to find joy and magic even when the world's kind of on fire, which it definitely is right now, and even
Yes,
when,
it is.
there's so much around us that is against us. So like even though your book is mostly about your interior life, what kind of like, I mean, this question might be obvious, but I also felt like I needed to ask it. But like, what
Yeah.
kind of outside changes also have to happen for people to transition more easily and with just less suffering in general?
Yeah. This is another interesting one because, yes, we are in such a difficult time right now with all the anti trans legislation that is being passed. It is truly a very scary time with the direction that we're headed right now in this country and other countries as well. And I had to step back because I was finishing this book up in about January of this year, and the uptick of anti-trans legislation has really been exploding since 2022. So I had to take a step back and say, I'm writing a book about trans joy and authenticity, and is it even relevant in the current climate that we're in? And I came to the conclusion that it has to be, because like you're saying, finding those spaces of joy and pleasure and connection has always been something that trans people do, and it will continue to be something that trans people do. And we have to create space for that. But will ever all trans and non-binary folks be fully able to be their authentic self with ease and joy and pleasure and curiosity fully in our current political climate? No. Of course, trans folks need protections. Of course, trans folks need to be celebrated for who they are. Of course, they need access to medical and mental health care that is affirming. All of those structural things are absolutely essential if we are truly, truly going to thrive in the way that I know we can. And a big and here, I believe so heavily in the magic of trans and non-binary folks and queer folks to create lives where they are thriving, like you're saying, even when the world is on fire. But we have to hold both. We have to hold both.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something that with the organizing I do with Trans Closet, we talk about a lot, which is that we're very like euphoria oriented. We're about like what clothes can you find today that will bring you gender euphoria and like that will mitigate your dysphoria and make you feel really good and at home in your body. Um, all of that, yes, but it's also a survival project.
Yeah.
Um, it has everything to do with like connecting people to resources that they desperately need and that they may not be able to access.
Hmm.
Um, and so it has to do with like having a good time and being joyful. And I think there's also a way in which um, trans joy is revolutionary just in itself, right? When we live
It is.
in such a hard, difficult time, then like coming together, um, and whether we're coming together in community or whether we're like meeting ourselves for the first time sometimes, then that's kind of a spiritual fuck you to the forces that would want to destroy us, right?
It sure is. Trans joy, trans pleasure, us connecting more deeply with our own bodies. And again, if this is something that you want, connecting with other bodies, it is revolutionary. It is. It is in a world where, the systems, the powers that be are trying to control our bodily autonomy, to give a giant fuck you to that and say, no, I get to experience joy and pleasure and rest in this body. That's revolutionary. It also refills our cup. That's where we go to get recharged, to be out in the world. And I found that the more I'm in those spaces, the more I allow myself to experience those things, the more I am not immune, but closer too immune of just random hate flying my direction. It creates a lot of resiliency when you have that strong foundation and you feel that your cup is full and you're connected to others.
Right. I mean, like, we like having that resilience is so important so that we can continue to fight for legislation that protects
Yes.
us, right?
Yeah,
And continue to like do the work of like building community so that we can survive. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Ray, what's your favorite moment of gender magic that you had recently?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, it is Pride Month, of course. Some people might be watching this later, so it is Pride Month right now, and I've been working my little tushy off on this book for so long, um, that it feels really good to have a month where I get to celebrate being out in the world as a queer and a trans person. You know, Gender Magic Book Baby is finally out in the world. So I would say a few moments that I've had in trans community recently. Um, I'll pick one out for you. My friends did a drag takeover at this big street fest. And it was absolutely beautiful. They did like a kids face painting, arts and crafts time. And then later in the night, they had like a full blown drag show. And it was so well attended. And just to see these kids delighting in these queens and to dance around with sweaty queers, it was just a moment where I think, like we've been talking about, even with the world being on fire, there was such joy and such community and connection. And it was just a beautiful collective pride and collective magical moment for me.
That sounds awesome. That sounds like so
Yeah,
much fun.
it was so great.
Yeah. I think mine is as a fellow tattooed trans person, you'll probably understand this, but I got a new tattoo yesterday, in fact. Um,
Very
so that
exciting.
was, and those, to sort of contextualize that, tattoos are very gender affirming for me and help me
Same.
feel like I'm in my body. And this one was also over my top surgery scars, which
Oh,
felt
fun.
felt absolutely bizarre, but looks really sick.
That is so exciting. And yes, I feel the exact same way getting tattoos. Every time I get one, I'm like, okay, I'm more me now. And
Yeah,
it just drops you into your body. And that's really cool. I'm sure it looks amazing.
thank you so much. Um, Actually, I wanted to ask you a little bit about like embodiment and like feeling like you're in your body, because that's something that you
Hmm.
talk about a bunch, especially in the chapter about, or the chapters about pleasure.
Yeah.
Um, but what do you think that that means for trans people? And like, how do you think, um, what are some ways that, if a trans or non-binary person is watching this, that they could like, I don't know, a favorite way to like feel like you're in your body?
It can be a complicated one for trans folks, especially trans folks who have dysphoria about their body, about maybe their chest or about maybe their like genital area. Um, that it's tough because there's conflicting feelings of, well, I don't feel fully at home in my body, but I also want to experience pleasure. And so one of the biggest shifts that I can give is, and this sounds, it is simple, but it is not easy, is to believe that you deserve to have pleasure in your body, even if, and here's the key, even if you don't love your body every second or love every part of your body every second, because that's a pretty high ask, to be honest. I don't know any cis person who loves their body every second. Um, but what we do always have access to is body respect. And I love this term, because it speaks to, even if you aren't feeling love or delight in your body, you can still respect it and you can still be kind to it and you can still believe that you and your body deserve pleasure, even if maybe you want to change a part of your body in the future, which is also great. So I think that is an important shift. I also love coming at pleasure, like kind of coming around to pleasure. Sometimes when we're talking about sexual pleasure, it feels like too much, right? Somebody isn't quite ready for that. They might get flooded. They might have some trauma, and we need to kind of come at it in a little bit of a softer way. So I generally teach people how to tap into pleasure with their senses in these ways that aren't sexualized. One of my most favorite is, I call it well, my brain has lost the name of what, oh, here it goes. I call it a pleasure bath. I'm like, what are words? So pleasure bath, it's great because if you're wanting to explore your body or your sexuality and pleasure in that, a good thing about a bath or a shower is that you're already naked. You don't have to worry about that part. You usually have a door that locks. Highly recommend that. And I recommend throwing in some coconut oil or something that feels good on your skin. Maybe light a candle if you're into that thing, or put on some music, whatever it may be that kind of touches as many of your senses as you can. And then just touch your body. That's it. That's the entire assignment. Just touch your body. The goal is not to arouse your body. There is no goal besides curiosity. So, for example, if you touch your arm, what does it feel like to touch it really lightly? What does it feel like to maybe like give yourself a forearm massage? What does it feel like if you run your fingers through your hair? And you're just getting to know, what does pleasure feel like in my body? And the more that you get to know that, the more you're going to be able to notice it. And, it's like looking for red cars on the highway. If you're going on a road trip, suddenly you see them everywhere. So when you start training your brain to notice pleasure and also putting yourself in environments where you can activate as many of your senses as possible, it's going to help you drop into your body in a very different way.
It reminds me again of how people play outside when you're really playing. Like sometimes you start out with no rules, and then you sort of develop, like you start noticing patterns and like what kind of activity you're interested in doing when you're outside. And also like kind of redefining what your roles are, right? Like we think so much about like, well, I've always been in like this sexual or romantic role, and to kind of take the label away on like what a body part is supposed to do or where it's supposed to go or something like that, can kind of open up different kinds of possibilities, where actually you're just making the rules. It's like Calvin Ball and Calvin and Hobbes. You're literally making it up as you go along, and it just is going to be different every time.
Yeah. And it should not be a secret, but I feel like it's a revelation to a lot of people of, we make all this up. All the stuff around gender and what it means and what our body parts mean and what they can do and how we're supposed to touch them and use them. We make it all up. So that means that you get to write your own story about, what does your body mean? How do you want to use your body? How do you want your body to be touched? And we can throw out these rule books that we were given, because for the majority of people, they're not a great fit. So it is this really beautiful playground that we get an opportunity to explore.
It also reminded me of the word that only appears a couple times in your book, but it's the name of your practice in Chicago, which is audacity. And I love the concept of audacity. Like I feel like it's ever since I saw that TikTok, which is like about, I have the homosexual audacity to think that I can do any home improvement project at any point.
I love that.
life-changing because I'm like, maybe I can just like learn how to build something or do something that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. Um, but but also like I love that you named your therapy practice that. And how
Thank
does
you.
that relate to the stuff about body stuff and gender that we've been talking about?
Oh, it's so related. So I also love this term audacity because there's kind of two parts of it, and people use it in two different ways. One is like the clutching of the pearls. Like they had the audacity to do this thing. And the other one is bold action that is unexpected, that, um, you know, it's a sense of bold action, I think is a key word in there, that is outside of the norm or what people expect you to do, or feels big to you. And I love that idea because both are true, right? When you have the audacity to live a life that is authentic, where you feel big and you aren't making yourself smaller for anybody else, when you have the audacity to say, hey, guess what? These rule books that we were given aren't necessarily helpful to me anymore. Or the rules we were given for relationships or how to have sex, what sex is, those are not actually useful to me. And we throw those out and say, we get to make up our own rules. That is audacious. And people will clutch their pearls. But that doesn't mean that we have to make ourselves smaller because someone else's world is too small for you.
I love that so much. I think that's a
Thank
really
you.
good note to like pause on to see if people in the audience have questions, because that just makes me feel like going outside and running around in my gender. Um,
Frolic about. Yes,
yeah.
please give us your questions.
Are there any questions from the audience? Or just like general comments, thoughts, um,
Complaints,
feedback?
tomatoes.
I'm going to pop back in because I have a question.
Go for it.
This has been such a gorgeous discussion and has been so filled with joy and light and beauty, um, and self-care.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, how did you decide to make this a book, and what your publishing process was like in getting this to bookstore shelves?
Yeah, I have always wanted to write a book. Ever since I was a little kid, I read books out the wazoo. I was the kid who, every week would go to the library in the summer with a milk crate and fill it up and then take it back the next week and do it over again. So it was always a professional goal of mine. I frankly thought it was a lot farther out than what it was. And I had some really amazing business mentors who kind of pushed me a little bit and said, hey, you said this is a 5-10 year plan. Why don't you make it a, 1 year/6 months plan? Like, okay. But the way it came about is I, have been working with trans folks for a long time, and I wanted to create a model of how I worked with people to try to organize my own thoughts and organize my work. And so I made a model called the gender freedom model that I pulled from my client work and a ton of research in the fields of psychology and education and design and sociology and on all these different fields. The journal, or the model, became a peer-reviewed journal article in a professional journal, and that became the backbone of the book. So I started writing the proposal for it in early 2021. I did that for about 6 months, and then I started pitching it to agents. Got one pretty quick. I was very lucky, and then also was very lucky to get a good publisher very quickly after that. So it was both fast and also 10 years in the making.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Such a great question. The book buying, selling, writing process it's a wild west out there.
I feel like I feel like if that were me, I would feel very overwhelmed because I expect for getting agent and then getting publisher to take forever.
I
So
did.
did you just feel like pulled along really quickly, or was it more like you felt like you had a lot of, you know, uh people pushing you more gently?
Good question. I didn't feel like I was being pushed faster than I wanted to go.
Mhm.
Um, but I did feel a lot of encouragement. And at that point, it felt like momentum. Like I had just finished the proposal. I was really excited about the topic, but also excited to not write for a month. So it felt like a very kind of natural and easeful momentum to get the agent that I did, who's great, and also to get the publisher and the editor I did, who has been such a champion of my work. I mean, they all have, but Hannah, my editor in particular, I'll give her a shout out, is just amazing and believed wholeheartedly in this project from the very first time that I met her. And that belief never wavered, even I think when my belief in myself did, because writing a book is hard. Um, but I was just very, very lucky to have the support team that I did to help get this book baby out in the world.
I love
I'm
it. I
so
have to say,
glad.
I do the buying for the store, and I think you really you hit upon a topic that really hasn't been fully explored yet in published
Yeah,
books. So
I
you
think so
timed it
too.
really nicely.
Good. And I'm hoping it opens the door for more books like mine, right? This is just the beginning of a conversation. And by folks buying gender magic and talking about gender magic and spreading those ideas, we're also voting for agents, for publishers, for the industry to hire more trans and non-binary folks to write books.
Yes, absolutely. We have
Yeah.
one person with their hand up. If you would like to
Yeah.
throw your comment or your question in the chat, that would be great.
We also had one moment in the Q&A. Someone said many of the topics you touched on are common to all people. Um, and yeah, I mean, Ray, that reminded me of what we were talking about right at the beginning, where you know, this book is not specific to trans and non-binary folk.
Mm-mm. Yeah, here's the thing. It's all, don't tell anybody. It's all sneaky life skills, all of it.
We could all use those.
Yeah.
And also that everyone's experience of gender is complicated, and that you know, being trans or non-binary is open to everyone as
Mm.
well.
Yep. Yeah, exploring gender, it's an underexplored part of who we are for a lot of cisgender folks. And so I'm excited to hopefully open that door a bit for people.
Absolutely.
Do we have
Ellis,
Joanne's
we don't
question?
have Joanne's question. I don't know. It's possible that they raised their hand, not on purpose. I'm not sure, but we'll wait another moment to see if that comes in. Otherwise, Ellis,
Oh,
can you tell us if we want to know more about Trans Closet of the Hudson Valley, how to do that?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a website, transclosethv.org. And on the website, you can donate to us. You can get involved if you live around here. We allow like cis allies to help with some things, but we love when trans and non-binary folks get involved most of all. You can find out a little bit more about like how we got started. We also have an Instagram, which is also just Trans Closet HV that you can follow. And you can also email us at transclosethv@gmail.com, and just introduce yourself. And if you want to connect, or if you have questions, or if you want to collaborate with us in any way, that would be amazing.
And I do see Joanne's question of, do you think that gender magic is suitable for an adolescent who is exploring gender identity? So this is what I will say to that. I'm a sex therapist. I talk about sex in the book. I would rate it at probably a PG-13. And so what I've been telling people is, parents, check it out first, and your child better than I do. So you get to decide if they are mature enough to handle that material, or if maybe there are chapters that they don't need to read just yet. But I think every child's maturity level there is going to be different. I definitely don't think it's not suitable for adolescents, but always give a little bit of caution to parents that it definitely has some sexual material in there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rae. That was a great question, Joanne. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's about that time. Oh my goodness. Thank you both so much for this incredible discussion. I will encourage everyone out there to pick up a copy of Rae's book, Gender Magic. You can order a copy at oblongbooks.com or go visit your local independent bookstore and ask for a copy there. Make sure they're stocking it.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you all so, so much
Thank you
for
so
joining us
much for
tonight.
having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for being here, Rae. It was great talking to you.
Likewise.
All right. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you so much.